Hey, everybody. Welcome back to your Full Crew podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host. We've got some great topics we're going to be talking about today, including repair robots in space, the FAA Reauthorization Act, soft robotics here on Earth used for surgery, and also the ongoing AI debate. So we've got some great guests to talk about these topics today. I'm going to start with Eleanor. Eleanor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. My name is Eleanor Nelsen. I work in strategic development at an interdisciplinary research institute at Virginia Tech. And we help build and support teams who are working in a huge range of emerging areas in technology and science, including drones. We're the parent organization for one of the 7 FAA designated test sites. And so we've been involved in a number of areas in research around drone integration. So thanks.
Well, nice to have you. And we also have Petra. So Petra, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks very much. Very nice to be here. I'm Petra Prazakova. I'm the founder of Robotics Talent Lab. So we're a boutique talent acquisition firm that supports the innovation, productivity, and growth of North America's robotics ecosystem. We work primarily with technology-based companies to identify, engage, and recruit for expertise in robotics, autonomous systems, and drone technologies.
Well, excited to have you here because we're going to be talking about all those things. We're going to be starting actually with robots in space. So Dawn's article. What's DARPA doing in space?
Well, DARPA's doing a lot and they're partnering. So this is an interesting public-private partnership. I'm sure Eleanor knows all about those. And DARPA, for those that don't know, is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They're working with Northrop Grumman's Space Logistics and the Naval Research Laboratory in this partnership, where there's going to be this robotic vehicle that's going to be physically repairing satellites in space. It's part of this program called the Robotic Servicing of Geosynchronous Satellites program. So the plan is a launch in early 2025. And the way it works is the Naval Research Lab is actually developing the robotics payload, which is going to be 2 next-gen robotic arms, multiple robotic tools, cameras for navigation, the software, and all of these things. And they're chipping away at their various milestones. But the interesting thing is that Northrop Grumman is at Space Logistics is going to mate it on their own spacecraft. And this thing is called the Mission Robotic Vehicle, or the MRV. And they're funding this thing, and they're going to launch it on the SpaceX Falcon 9 into space. They're shooting for 2025, no pun intended there. And then there's going to be, this is like so crazy. There's going to be these propulsion jetpacks that are going to come off of this MRV thing called mission extension pods. And they're going to attach to the commercial satellites, and it's all going to work where it's going to repair all of these ailing satellites, which is really significant. By the way, it takes like 10 months just for the pod to get into orbit. So, this is a long-term project, but really interesting because there's so many commercial satellites in space, and they can really extend the lifetime of these things and also avoid space junk, which we've talked about on this show before. So I just thought this was a really cool article, a public-private partnership where there's like these robotic mechanics going to be launching up into space.
Seems pretty complicated, actually.
Yeah, it makes my head hurt a little bit.
Eleanor, Petra, either of you want to ask Dawn a question about this?
That's a fascinating idea. I'm curious if you see this kind of as the way forward for a lot of space exploration, where you take the existing infrastructure and equipment that already exists and then find ways to modify it or extend its life or upfit it. Because this is such an interesting area where it's hugely expensive to build these things, right? And space is a very unforgiving and very harsh environment. And technology in this area is developing really rapidly. And so I would imagine that there's a huge appetite for finding ways to use new technology to modify and extend the utility of old technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I went to the Space Symposium a couple months ago. It was in Colorado Springs, which is my hometown. And what I found really surprising, because space is not something I usually dive into deeply. And so that was really my first time hearing some of the talks and seeing the technology and walking the floor and talking to some of these companies. There's this whole space economy that is bubbling. And I actually, Eleanor, just wrote an article for Military Embedded Systems magazine about all the different things Lockheed Martin is doing with regards to the space economy and all the different vehicles they're creating, not just satellites, but like what we're talking about here. So yeah, it's really interesting. And like I said, there's so many before space used to be relegated just to government satellites, right? GPS, as everybody, well, maybe everybody doesn't know, GPS is actually 13 satellites that our US government put up, and that's what creates our GPS, right? There's other ones other countries have. But the fact that there are so many commercial satellites up there right now, that and when they time out, they just float around. And all you need is like we talked about this, Mike, before, right?
Yeah.
All you need is like a little pea-sized something around it, flying in space. It goes so fast, it would explode that satellite, into a million different pieces. And then that's a big problem, right? So many issues in space right now, but to have a mechanic type robot that will fly up there and be able to extend the lifetime of some of these, I think is really going to be significant.
Petra, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I just also think about the added complexity of this being an autonomous system, right? I mean, you think about first of all, I also want to make a quick comment about the Canadarm. I mean, it's certainly done some incredible things for the International Space Station. I noted in the article that there's certainly that this autonomous arm is seems to have a lot more capability and different capability. I think it's really fascinating. I wonder from a regulatory standpoint whether there's any issues around autonomous systems in space. If it's just such a frontier out there at this point that it's not an issue as it is sort of in subsea systems and aviation systems.
That's a great question. I honestly don't know the answer, but you're absolutely right. And you raised the really key point here. This thing is supposed to be operating autonomously.
Mhm.
So the FAA also obviously has a big role in space here in the United States. And we're having a lot of issues when it comes to autonomous things closer to the Earth, like drones. So
Right.
I don't quite appreciate the autonomous nature in space, although, every time I think about it, you see the mission control people, right, at NASA, and they're in the big control room and everybody's watching this thing. I think there's a lot of autonomous features on rockets and the satellites that they put up there. But are they fully autonomous? That's a great question. Maybe somebody in the audience knows. By the way, I know you guys are out there, so make sure you're jumping in the chat. If you have any comments, please add them. Have any questions, ask them. But no, that's a great question. I don't know the kind of regulatory implications on autonomous systems in space. It's a great question. Do you know, Eleanor? No.
No, I don't. And I think it's a great question too, because obviously we struggle with that a lot in the more terrestrial aviation sector.
Yeah, I think once these things get in the orbit, they just kind of go. I just think that's the nature of the way it works up there. But and yeah, go ahead,
We
Mike.
figure there has to be some coordination, though. Like, you don't want to launch a rocket into another satellite when you're deploying. So
Yeah.
I wonder how much these are handshake agreements, though. Or maybe that was part of the initiative of having Space Force. Is like, what do you mean we're just leaving them up there and anybody could get to them? But one thing about this plan is it sounds almost too complicated, given what I know about terrestrial robotics, and when you allow them to be autonomous and so on. I mean, the theory, it's like one of those things, like we have all of those pieces and technologies, but that the timeline specifically is what gives me the pause, because even when you have all of the pieces, it takes a lot of testing, retesting, refinement of, and how do you test something that's so expensive to even get to the test bed, so to speak, right? Space is not cheap. It takes a lot of fuel to get there.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was such a weird business that I found at the Space Symposium. There's a business that exists solely to clean the different parts of these vehicles before they go into space, because you can't introduce foreign matter into space. And so who would have thought even about that? So when you think about the complexity of these operations, something as simple that we take for granted of, just putting the robot together, having to like sanitize it to the point where it's not introducing foreign matter into space. I mean,
we are afraid of like breeding aliens or something.
Well,
No, well, bacteria would be enough alien on its own, right?
Yeah.
If it was allowed to breed in an environment outside of Earth. So Elizabeth Pullen commented. She said, "It's more complicated than I can chat." Probably referring to your question
the law
about
part. So Elizabeth used to work for me and with me in the United States JAG Corps. So hey, Elizabeth. No, but if there are regulations that make autonomy a little bit more difficult in space, just give us a yes or no, and then we can talk more later. But
or send them over to Dawn, and then it'll end up in the newsletter. So
there you go. Yeah, send it to me. Email me at dawn@p3techconsulting.com, and I will add it to my newsletter. That's a great point, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah, that's why we got it now.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to be moving on to the next article, which is robots down here on Earth, used for really, I think, well, both the form factor and the use case are interesting. So this is Petra's article.
Yeah, this was Eleanor's article, right? No,
okay. No, this one was Petra's.
The squishy robots was Petra's article.
Squishy
Tell
robots.
us about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I guess first of all, I guess I'll share why I chose this article. I think that really I could have spoken about any aspect of robotics as it applies to transformative technologies, but I find soft robotics particularly interesting because it's an emerging field of robotics. That offer unique opportunities, right, in areas in which conventional rigid-bodied robots are not viable. As amazing those rigid-bodied robots are, as amazing they are in space as autonomous systems, they have some limitations, for example. So it's also has potential for some really significant positive impacts on society in so many ways. So, for instance, in healthcare or rehabilitation. So we'll chat about that as we kind of get into the article. But also, I love the fact that robotics or soft robotics researchers take so much of their inspiration from nature, right? They're really looking to replicate some of the remarkable abilities of natural organisms in terms of their adaptability and locomotion, sensing and autonomy to fabricate soft robots. So it's just such a very cool area. So that's why I chose it. And, when you talk about soft robotics being sort of made up of the squishiest stuff and approximating biological functions, I think that there's a really interesting paradox in robotics that says that it's really easy to train robots to do things that humans find difficult, like mathematics and logic. But it's really difficult to train them to do things that we find easy, like walking or picking up an object. And yeah, we know that humans are not born pre-programmed with an intelligent, set of intelligent behaviors. Like we learn to carry on conversation, move through a crowd, or fly an airplane. And we've developed this embodied intelligence by adjusting to constant feedback from our own bodies and from our by navigating our surroundings. So perhaps the best example of embodied intelligence would be living organisms, or fully soft organisms, like an octopus, right? She can move, given her body, her shape, material, and her structure. It allows her, without any kind of planning, to kind of conform to her environment. So, all that to say, so many robotics researchers have asked this question, like, why don't we put some of this embodied intelligence into traditional robots to create physically flexible bodied robots so they can interact freely and be used for delicate tasks while responding to unexpected situations in the real world. So, pretty fascinating area of science, I think.
Yeah, so this was Harvard scientists used this liquid silicon rubber to develop the Octobot, which is the first ever soft autonomous robot. I don't know, I get kind of itchy when I think about autonomous being used for something, let's say, like surgery, but we use robotics in surgery all the time now. It's at high profile surgeries and things of that nature. So I guess it's just, step one, right? Any questions from you, Eleanor?
No, I think it's a fascinating topic. And one of the things, so, this is the kind of domain that is at the interface of more traditional, robotics, mechanical engineering, computer science, and then biology. If you're building things that are supposed to mimic human motions or interface with human or biological systems, obviously you have to be really well versed in how those work. And it's interesting because those kind of intersections, I think, are where so many of the opportunities for like really transformative breakthroughs are. And that's, that's the area where in our research institute, we kind of sit and we've provided seed funding for work like this. And it's challenging because researchers who want to do this kind of work are real visionaries. It's such fascinating, really, really, really cool stuff. But it can be hard from traditional funding agencies, traditional federal funding agencies, to get funding for research like this that's really interdisciplinary and really, really bold and ambitious, versus traditional disciplinary research where there's like a really long, storied body of knowledge already. And so that's a challenge that we face in the academic space all the time, is trying to find a way to provide the resources that stuff like this that's so cool and so innovative really needs to get off the ground. So it's awesome to see things like this kind of make it out into the world.
Yeah, I was going to say, having worked in both the federal government and academia, it's just amazing, the bureaucracy. And you're absolutely right, Eleanor, like, oh, this is cross-disciplinary. This is just too hard to do. It just like makes me want to beat my head against the wall, right? But what I love about this, someone, I think it was you, Mike, saying you were like squeamish about, autonomous robot or whatever for biological or for surgical reasons. I mean, man, like a robot that was smooth, that could do, go through your colon for a colonoscopy. I mean, amen. I mean, sign me up, because I've had the other one more than once. And, because everybody's bodies are so different, and the tools they have right now are very clunky, and, it's not a good day when you wake up and the guy's like, yeah, we had to jam that through. It's like, no. Okay, that I didn't need to know. But like having a squishy robot, and just think of all the different, the different medical applications, but so many other applications too. They were talking about like, exo suits to facilitate recovery from injuries or strokes, prosthetics. I already talked about the endoscopes, but the really cool one, let's take it outside the medical arena, that I thought was amazing, was disaster recovery. So we see drones being used, and even ground robots like, the spot dogs and things like this, post disaster, right? But imagine a squishy robot that could really get in between the rubble and help find people or pets. To me, that is just an amazing use case. And so when you think about the funding, because we hear so much about, specific use cases, at least in the robotics and drone world, right? Like where if it's something that the public would accept readily, that, maybe it's easier to get some funding for that. And to me, I think public safety, first response, disaster response, all of these things would be amazing use cases to say, hey, over here, we could use some of that funding to show you that not only can we fly drones and maybe use ground, the quadruped uncrewed ground vehicles, UGVs, but have these all networked then with soft robots too. Wow. I mean, I that would just be amazing to me.
Yeah, I really like your rubble example, because it brings me back to what Petra said about an octopus, and if you've ever seen videos, it's kind of beautiful fluid, how they can shift shape. They could even there's a certain breed that has camouflage capabilities that are out of this world too. You combine the two and they could basically mimic any form factor. But thinking about that, getting through rubble, like it's basically this beautiful little amoeba that can crawl around and find somebody, which is, compare that to traditional, let's call them solid robots, and they're basically doing what I pick things up, I put them down. Or you have an RC car, which is then very, very limited by terrain, or drone, which is limited by aerodynamics and its ability to fit into space. We've seen roll cage drones. All of that kind of assumes like a certain amount of space that you have to navigate, whereas this is a little bit squishier, right?
Yeah.
So just going to take a quick break. We want to thank our sponsors, AeroVigilance, Drone Up, Ruprecht Law, and we've added CSG Strategies. We actually had Trent from CSG on our last Full Tilt, so go check out that episode if you have a chance. Moving on to the next article. So our favorite topic, or we've been talking about it since, what was it, November, where I basically got the release of ChatGPT early, and we talked about it, did a live demo, and we've watched it cascade to this amazing crescendo of hysteria. But Eleanor is probably going to bring us down to earth with a little bit of a taxonomy of the different kind of philosophical positions that people have around AI. So Eleanor, tell us about this article.
Well, yeah, so this was a really great article by Kelsey Piper, writing for Vox's Future Perfect feature. And, I am by no means an expert in AI at all. And so I've just been watching this kind of from an external perspective. And it's been really interesting to watch the public conversation, exactly as you said, the crescendo of hysteria kind of unfold, over the last year or so around the advent of ChatGPT. And it's so interesting. And what I think this article did such a nice job of distilling down is looking at how different people's perspectives are on it, just the radically different viewpoints that people are taking. And it's like you have multiple different conversations that are occurring around AI that are barely intersecting each other at all. And the divergence of these viewpoints that are starting from like almost totally different kind of sets of ground truth is to some extent, impeding the ability to really get anything done around an issue that's obviously, taking up a lot of the oxygen in the tech world right now. And so she talks about, she separates this, and I love your word, Mike, of taxonomy. She separates it into 4 kind of quadrants of ways that people are thinking about AI. There'd be a lot of ways to do this, but I think that her system is pretty good, where she looks at 2 axes. One being like, okay, what's the level of impact? Is it going to have a dramatic impact on the world? Is it going to have kind of a, moderate impact on the world? Or is it going to have, and so you look at degree of impact, and then you look at the type of impact. Is that fundamentally good or fundamentally bad? And that splits you into kind of 4 different quadrants. And, in the one you have, well, it's fundamentally good. It's going to have a huge impact. It is a completely different type of technology from anything that we've seen before. It's intrinsically unique. And it's going to have this, and it can make our world better in so many hugely important ways. So you've got, letters and blog posts from people like Bill Gates saying, well, this is going to revolutionize global health by providing resources to, places with traditionally very poor health networks, places in the global South, very under-resourced places, bringing health and medical knowledge and expertise to areas that otherwise wouldn't have them and are suffering greatly under these kind of health burdens. Or, AI being able to predict and mitigate the impact of climate change. This is a huge technology that can take some of the biggest problems we're now facing and fix them, or at least give us more tools to fix them. And then you have, again, on the huge impact side of the huge impact, side of the axis, but bad. You have some of the same people saying, well, this is going to end humanity. You had a couple months ago an open letter saying, well, this is, this has the potential to eradicate the human race. A couple months ago, a couple weeks ago, there was a statement, again, by a number of very prominent AI researchers and people in the industry saying that, the risks of AI should be seriously considered on the scale of like nuclear destruction or pandemics as a fundamental risk to humanity that we haven't really faced before. Either because it's going to give people radically new tools. Like I saw an article about people being able to use ChatGPT to get instructions for for creating a bioweapon, essentially, either because it's going to empower humans radically more than they've been empowered so far, or because you're creating a new intelligence with different goals to people. And so you have this prognostication of doom. And so those are the very big impact groups. And then you have the two other groups, the moderate impact groups. The good one that says, well, look, this is just going to create some new tools, right? Like kids can have AI tutors, and that's cool. I read a neat article in the New York Times about doctors using ChatGPT to improve their bedside manner, having better relationships with patients, being more encouraging, because doctors
I read that one too.
Like, I think some doctors don't know what to say to people who are.
And I appreciate that they asked. How can I do a better job at just because part of the job and the training,
Yeah. And so that's all good stuff, right? Like it's not revolutionary, but it's new tools that people can use. And then there's also a really active line of discussion around, well, yeah, this is going to have some negative impacts. It's the same kind of but it's not a uniquely negative impact in the way that this is going to end humanity, but more, this is going to exacerbate problems that we already have. It's going to exacerbate racial and gender-based bias and discrimination. It's going to exacerbate kind of this hollowing out of the middle-class workforce that we already see by outsourcing, knowledge economy jobs to ChatGPT or other similar generative intelligence systems, and that it's going to continue to concentrate power and data and authority in the hands of a few people and companies, and that what we need is much better regulation to prevent harms that we already see happening. And one of the most interesting pieces of this argument to me is that the people who are making that kind of argument saying, well, that these predictions of doom that the world is going to end are actually a distraction from some of the less extreme but still significant bad stuff that's happening now. So those are kind of
look over here because we're going to keep discriminating over there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and Kelsey's argument in Vox is that kind of how different, the people who are really invested in either the super good or the super bad arguments are going to be less likely to pay attention to the moderate ones, and the moderates are kind of disinclined to give real credence to the more extreme ends of the scale. And so everybody's kind of having different conversations. So that was kind of interesting to me way to segment all of this discussion that's happening right now around AI.
I would love to get the vote on what quadrant you guys fall in. I want to go with Petra first. What quadrant do you fall in?
Well, I think that AI, has potential to really, complement, augment, a lot of human capabilities. I really do. I'm very encouraged by it, but I'm also cautiously encouraged. As an example, you're talking about ChatGPT. I had read an article that said a lawyer, an attorney, had used ChatGPT to provide a legal opinion, and it was based on fictitious cases.
Yeah.
Right. So, AI, there are flaws. I think we need to be cautious in rushing to this accepting, all of that's coming at us from an AI perspective. I think you just gotta sort of pause a little bit and maybe be a little discerning when using some of these tools. But for the most part, I think that, I mean, you look at it in robotics and autonomy, that alone, like in that realm, I mean, I think it's pretty brilliant what's happening with autonomy and drones and such. So I'm kind of a proponent.
Yeah.
So I'm in quadrant 5.
Of course you are, Mike. Of course
Yeah.
you are.
Well, because one of the things that we never gets addressed, I think LLMs have captured the mind of non-technical people about a technology that has already existed and already transformed our world.
And LLM being large language models.
Okay. Yeah, LLMs being large language models. So like, because this was a parlor trick that only humans had for, well, dolphins and whatever, but we don't really understand what those beeps and clicks mean. But it kind of just grabbed the attention of people in a way that I just don't think this technology actually is when you deal with it, right? So, and that's what people are finding out as they actually interact with it. They're like, oh, this is kind of like a slot machine, and sometimes it gives me the wrong answer, and it's a terribly wrong answer. Whereas the successes are happening kind of along the lines where AI or machine learning model success already was, which was refining models to specific tasks. And we've had great success in that in computer vision. We probably already see it in our searches and in our social media feeds and how they serve us content. So I'm not expecting a political upheaval, anything worse than that has already been done by the AI that controls our feed. Just because it could generate words doesn't mean that the feed is going to get any better. Yeah. And so I'm not apocalyptic, but I'm probably closest to 4, I think, which is AI won't majorly transform our world because it already has, is my caveat. Super intelligent stuff is nonsense, but it will be good if we use it as tools.
I don't know. I am a little concerned, honestly. I'm sure you guys all saw the recent story that went viral on Twitter and a number of social media platforms where this lieutenant colonel from the Air Force was out there talking about some demonstration they had where the AI turned around and basically, again, simulated, not real, killed the operator, allegedly. Because the task at hand was to take out specific types of structures, and the operator was getting in the way of the task. And so allegedly the AI decided, this is my mission. You're impeding my mission, so you need to go. Now, the Air Force later, in fact, the individual himself came out and retracted that and said, oh, yeah, nothing to see here. That never really happened. But, having been in the Air Force as long as I was, which is like 25 years, I'm thinking, that kind of really did happen, because I think I find it really hard to believe that some like high-ranking officer would be out there yammering about a project that never actually occurred. I don't buy it. And, if it actually happened, then I think people just needed to own that and say, oh man, we learned something on this one. But, think about that. And the problem with any technology, as we all know, it depends on who's using it and what they decide to use it for. So, the fact that, this could get into, rogue terrorists or, bad actors' hands, and what, can they get a hold of the nuclear codes? Like, what does that look like? Are we talking about Skynet? I mean, I don't think it's a big leap of the imagination. Sadly, Hollywood has been dreaming up horrific things that have actually occurred in real life. Hollywood and book authors, right? I think it was Clancy that had a 9/11 like scenario in one of his books where airplanes were flown into buildings like missiles. So, I think sometimes, fiction is very close to reality, and that does concern me. What are the bumper lanes? And even if you have them, can you really police that? I think is the concern, right? So I'm more on the it's going to be big. I just hope it's not going to be really bad camp. But that's just my personality.
We don't know, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, people are concerned enough about the threats that they're talking about them and trying to figure out a way to mitigate them. So the historical example, or there's probably two. There is nuclear, which has the obvious effect of the scientists that helped the U.S. with their program all regretted it on some level because of what happened with the bombs. What was Oppenheimer? I Have Become Death.
The movie's coming out too, by the way. I'm excited.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. But the other side about that is genetic research and things along those lines, where the science community had extreme apprehensions, thinking they were going to create the island of Dr. Moreau. But through constant conversation, we have gene therapies or better understanding of our heritage and who we are and where we come from. That some of us actually have some Neanderthal. I think that showed up on my my cousin found out she had some Jewish lineage, which we thought that was the WASPy side for people who aren't Long Islanders, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So these are cool revelations that was only possible because of mapping of the human genome. So it could go both ways, but definitely an interesting taxonomy. I think at least a sober one, right? So that was kind of cool. All right, final article of the day. Big topic for Dawn and I, maybe for you too also. But another FAA Reauthorization Act clears the House of Representatives. Package calls for more progress on BVLOS flight and drone integration. This is from our friends at Drone Life. Great write-up by, I'm assuming, Miriam. Yep, Miriam, I could see it. So why are reauthorization acts even something you should care about? Well, they set the budget for everything in aviation, or for the FAA specifically, and also kind of sets up the plan and roadmap for how the administration is going to be advancing the airspace or maintaining the airspace for, what is it, a 5-year, 6-year span, Dawn?
This one is a 5-year package, and we'll see if it flies. No pun intended.
Yeah, so they don't come around often, but they're extremely important. And what follows them is a notice of proposed rulemaking for whatever specific subcategory you're in. The last one for drones, I remember, set records for public comments. What is that?
Remote ID, yeah, 50.
Remote ID,
yeah.
So BVLOS, I would expect would get something similar, but maybe not as much because it doesn't affect the the hobby base. But lots of other kind of cool things in this recent reauthorization. So the it's going to be 4 months where the FAA has to produce an NPRM. So that means we're going to get to a public comment period on BVLOS, or beyond visual line of sight flights, pretty quick. It's going to be another 18 months or 16 months after that for actual enactment. But I think everybody's been holding their breath in the drone industry for BVLOS since 2016, assuming that these things were right around the corner, even as we were complaining that the FAA wasn't doing enough about UAS integration. Other than that, I didn't really see anything pop out after this. Out of this, I tried to read all. I think it's section. It's like 601 to 680, somewhere in that is the drone section. A lot of it was kind of stuff I've already seen before. The FAA has this authority for test sites and can hire people to do X, Y, Z. Universal UAS traffic management system, some advancements there, but nothing really killer other than BVLOS in my eyes. Anybody else get anything out of it?
Well, I'll jump in here. And by the way, Petra's in Canada, and I did just see Canada pushed out a beyond visual line of sight rule like in the last couple of days. So Transport Canada just did that. So once again,
that was part of it too.
Behind. What's that?
Well, actually, playing with international authorities or looking to international authorities was actually there in plain language that's something that you should be doing. So
yeah,
I don't know if that's been there in the past, but
well, that that's a good point. I don't know that it was. Doesn't mean that they have to do it, but you're right. If everybody else is using the JARA SORA, why are we not just using it? But whatever. That all aside, what I thought was interesting was what wasn't there. And what wasn't there are anything about the counter UAS authorities with regards to the Preventing Emerging Threats Act. So, that's sunsetted. It was extended. This is the authority that gave a handful of federal agencies in the United States the authority to detect and mitigate credible threats, right? And then they all implemented this in different ways vis-a-vis policies, but there were, a handful of bills that were introduced late last year, that would have extended some of those authorities to first responders, to, some folks that are operating critical infrastructure, which in the United States, it's over 85%, I think, of our critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector. And right now, at least in some camps, they believe they don't even have the authority to detect drones flying around certain facilities, which is not a good place to be. So what was a little frustrating to me was that it was not addressed at all. What was in there was, for those that recall, this section 2209. This is where certain stakeholders could petition the FAA to have their site, like railroads. There were a number of enumerated sites in section 2209, and this was from the 2016 act that still has not been implemented to this day. This particular reauthorization act pushed all of those dates back, like, yep, we'll say 2028 or something like this is the day that, is the date where 2020, 2209 should be enacted, kind of thing. So I thought that was interesting. And there's another piece of this that I can't think of, but it, around the counter UAS part. But yeah, the Emerging Preventing Threats Act, they didn't touch it. And that's a little disheartening, honestly, because, again, I can't attribute this to a particular speaker, but my understanding is the FBI has a very small handful of people doing this work, and they can only support less than 1% of the requests at major events. So, I mean, seriously, when you think about,
I'm surprised that they don't have the agents just, ready to handle this thing that they never had any infrastructure for to begin with.
Yeah, I mean,
and if you don't provide it or require it, why would they set it up? Like, everybody's just going to keep doing their job as is if you don't.
Yeah, I think even the folks that have this authority today, I think they're somewhat hamstrung in the policies that were put in place and how to execute that. Now, I know there needs to be, again, I'll use the term bumper lanes here, the right level of approval and things like this. But is that where we are right now? So I don't think that's a great place to be. And by the way, everybody, tomorrow I'm actually doing a webinar with Defense Solutions on this counter UAS topic. So I'll have better notes for that one.
Eleanor, any insights on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the House bill ended up in a pretty good place. I know there were some changes that came out of, markup and revisions that were positive, adding some more language about performance-based requirements for UAS, which I know has been a big
yeah,
issue
I saw a lot of that
in the past. I'm going to be really curious to see what comes out of the Senate bill. I think their markup got postponed until after the recess. There was some language in the Senate bill around counter UAS, and I am not, a legal expert to understand exactly what the implications of all that was, but it did include some carve outs for federal agencies and contractors for doing some of that work that I think that is going to be something that's really, really important moving forward. And I think, unfortunately, it's gotten caught up in a lot of political gamesmanship around privacy concerns and even issues around law enforcement that I think has kind of stalled some of that progress in the House. And so, maybe the discussion around the Senate bill will be a good opportunity to get some of that language worked back in when they ultimately get reconciled. But yeah, that's something that we're watching pretty closely.
Yeah, I also saw some language in there that made me think there might be some changes to what I think the Hobby Lobby felt were strict requirements, but I couldn't really parse it. Maybe one of you could. So it was Section 44809 of Title 49. No clue what that is. Is amended to include
small that's the recreational drone rule.
Okay, so it's amended to include exceptions for limited recreational operations of unmanned aircraft. Does that mean it was restricted before?
I'd have to go look at it, Mike. But
All
what
right.
you said 44809?
Yeah, 44809 of Title 49.
Yeah,
So
and what is this purporting to do?
In Class G airspace, drones can fly from the surface up to a maximum of 400 feet. That's already there. And it's specified areas, which we already had.
FRIAs.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was like lifting the requirement on that or adding or just reaffirming it.
Oh, if it was lifting the requirement, that would be huge, because that was obviously one of the reasons why Race the Quad sued the FAA on the remote ID rule, was the creation of these federally recognized identification areas that if you did not have a remote ID compliant drone, that you were then relegated to flying in these very specific small areas that only like educational institutions and, kind of these nonprofit like AMA, groups could petition the FAA to create in the first place. And the race day quads and the other first person view or FPV pilots were like, wait a minute, we fly our drones out in the wilderness, we fly them fast through forests.
Yeah, just like all model aircraft people did in the past, and that this technology is, especially if it's operated by a person, is fundamentally not that different, right? I think that's what their case was, and it's, as time goes on and we don't put any priority on CUAS, because the whole issue, because we were going to paint the sky black with drones or white with drones, whatever. You could not see the sun. There would be so many drones running around in the sky, and they were a threat to aircraft. If we're not going to put the emphasis on CUAS, we're not going to give anybody authorities to detect, and that we're okay going another 5 years with a possible incident literally being catastrophic. Why are these restrictions put? I was, when it seemed like there was something coming, I was more on the FAA sides on this. As we are doing nothing, I'm less so as time goes on. What were you going to say, Dawn?
You just remind me by what you said, what the other point was that they included in this. So in the 2018 reauthorization, that Congress gave the FAA authority for 5 years to do this testing of counter UAS systems at specific airports, right? They pick a handful, they do this. Well, in those 5 years, I think they've tested about 12 systems. And so what this one does is it amends, gives them another 5 years. And I'm just like, oh my God, 5 more years of R&D. Seriously, we need to move further than that. And I conflated the issue that I talked about earlier with the extension 2209. What they did there was they tweaked the timelines a little bit. It wasn't 5 years. I apologize for that. But what they did was they said, well, we're going to add like amusement parks. There was like a catch-all phrase in 2209 that had a lot of people freaked out, because it was like, and anybody else that could apply, or that kind of thing. And they necked that down to like amusement parks and something else. And then they gave them another specific timeline like this, 4 months and 16 months, if I recall correctly now. So that's interesting on 2209. And then also I think it's called 309 authority, the airport counter UAS system, but more on that tomorrow. But Petra, you're in Canada. What are you seeing? What are from where you sit, your observations about how Canada's doing from the aviation standpoint beyond visual line of sight and some of these other challenges that we're facing?
So first of all, I think I would say that I'm absolutely not an expert on this. So,
Yes.
My very kind of cursory observation or knowledge is that, I know that in Canada, you have to have a special flight operations certificate issued by Transport Canada to fly beyond the visual line of sight. And it's, provided on a case-by-case basis. I was trying to do some research actually, because then you'd be talking about this to get a sense of like, how common is this? How infrequent is this? And I couldn't get really much information on it. So, it's very interesting, but it's certainly really kind of beyond my capability to really comment on. I don't see a whole lot of drones flying around. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Well, you bring up an interesting point. Like, so, what was it? Part 303 was what you had to get like a special sign off to do drone operations for commercial purposes way back
333,
before.
section 333.
333. Yeah, and so same thing with there was like one EV loss kind of waiver granted to Precision Hawk back in the day, and they claimed they had a BV loss one, and it was never really verified if they did anything with it. But all this goes to show that when it's that restricted and there's not a clear rule, nobody even gets through that process, right? So if there's that much requirements that, you have to be anointed to be able to do it rather than, the law is clear if you're able to do it, most people just don't, right? So you're probably not seeing any BV loss operations that are easily Googleable, because if they are being used by companies for a very specific purpose or limited purpose or proprietary purpose that they're not willing to kind of share publicly. So that kind of holds the whole industry back.
Well, it does, because, Petra is sitting in this, basically standing in the shoes of, Joe or Jill Q Public right now. This is not her world like it is more so Mike's and Eleanor's and mine, where we're reading about this, we're going to the trade shows, we know what's going on. She's trying to research it, can't even find anything. I mean, that should tell you something right there. Transport Canada, FAA, like, we need to be a little bit more transparent about what is happening, where, the public can know, because until they see the amazing things, Petra, I can tell you in Canada, there are companies doing long linear pipeline inspections that would otherwise be very expensive by helicopter, dangerous. Same thing with power lines and things like this. But if nobody's telling those stories to the public, then they don't know the goodness that drones are actually bringing to society. And I think we harp on this all the time, but I'll just say it once more. We need to do a better job, talking to the public versus and with the public, not just at them or to them, but with them about what is happening in this industry.
So I wanted to ask Eleanor a question about performance-based standards and why they're important. I know, but I want to hear it from somebody else, because you had mentioned that this is something people have been asking for more of. So why is it a big deal that they put it in black and white?
Okay, well, since you already know the answer, I hope I'm going to get it right. So the challenge with a lot of the things, a lot of the BB law stuff, operations over people, the things that are outside of Part 107, that stuff has been allowed only on a case-by-case basis. You're getting specific waivers, you're getting specific exemptions, and there have not been typically really quantitative thresholds that people have been able, that operators have been able to target to say, okay, if we can meet this extremely quantitative level of safety, then we can operate. It's kind of been well, submit us your safety case, submit us your documentation, and we'll know it when we see it, if it's safe enough. And that, and that's not really a good operating environment for companies who want to know if they're going to be able to meet a specific target. And so
I'll put all the money up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe it'll work. I don't know. And so
just go out of business when you say no. Yeah, I'll do that.
I mean, I totally understand. Obviously, the FAA is very interested in limiting, in maximizing safety and limiting liability. Our whole mission at the test site is to make sure that this stuff can be integrated safely. We would argue that in many cases it can be integrated safely. You can meet a very high level of safety. People just need predictability about what that level of safety is. I think they made some real progress here with the operations over people rule when they did lay out specific parameters based on injury severity that drones would have to hit in order to be able to operate over people. And then, if they set that safety threshold, then organizations like ours or like ASTM can come out with specific test methods and means of compliance that companies can use to reach those standards. Then you can make progress. Once you have that kind of system where you have a target and you have a way to meet it, then companies have something to design to. And then I think people that dramatically expands people's ability to move into this space and really see the benefits of a lot of the kind of the applications that you're talking about, Dawn, that can really have very positive impacts on people. But you can't get there unless you can do some of these expanded operations. So,
sure.
And it really affects the entire ecosystem. Like when I work with the Drone Code Foundation as a contractor part-time, and those developers spend a lot of time trying to figure out, because there's limited resources. You think there's thousands of drone developers, there's less than that. And the ones that actually do it consistently at a peak level are even less than that, right? And if they don't know what they need to prioritize in terms of standards, they could get sideswiped with something like remote ID or and then everybody has to kick it down the road. And then you have an entire industry that's out of compliance and they're still selling these out of compliant things. So yeah, I think this is great. I know people have been asking for it for a long time, to have more performance-based standards. And to kind of require it of the FAA, I think, is important. So good new step. Wanted to end with something positive. So that was it. I want to thank our guests, both Eleanor and Petra, for sharing great insights today. Also, thank you to the audience for jumping in. Also to our sponsors, which make the show possible: AeroVigilance, Rubric Law, CSG Strategies, and Drone Up. Thank you, everybody. Dawn, do we have anything coming up next weekend?
Yeah, so actually this week we have Sharper Shape on the Dawn of Drones Wednesday at 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Eastern. They are doing some of these inspections that I talked about. So check them out. I believe Finland-based and also big U.S. presidents working with Volatus Aerospace out of Canada. And then Thursday we're kicking off a brand new month. It's the end of June, everybody. Can you believe it? We're going to be kicking off a brand new month dedicated to this theme of innovation with Carasoft. And Lacey Ween is in charge of their robotics and autonomy line card and line of effort there at Carasoft. So join us in Clubhouse on Thursday with Lacey. I do want to say two things also real quick. Number one, Dr. Nelsen, she was very sparse in her bio there, was one of our Law Tech Connect scholars this year in Denver. And so we're continuing to push out some of that content. So next up in July is going to be the Counter UAS or Security panel. So check that out. Stay tuned. Follow me on social to get those dates and sign up to get that exclusive content because it is private. And then the second thing is Petra is going to be on the Dawn of Drones in August. That's a month dedicated to building program success. And we're going to talk about that hiring process and the workforce development and talent management. So it should be really exciting.
Looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yep. Sounds like a packed schedule as always, Dawn. You're finally done from your big tour of all the conferences.
Yes, for now. Next up, commercial UAV.
Yeah, so we've got some time, and that's going to be a great show. So check out our friends there. Again, thank you to Drone Life for the great article on the FAA Reauthorization Act. And that's it for today. We are out here.